recognizing and identifying your reality, acknowledging the lies we tell ourselves. Above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to the point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. Fyodor Dostoevsky. There are so many forms of lies we hear every day. Sometimes the lies are told to protect you from something. It could be something as trivial as keeping the knowledge of something you are not ready to know, for example, a surprise birthday party. Sometimes the lies are more complicated, but not told entirely out of malice, like telling a person about their cheating spouse. The point is, for good or bad, we all tell lies, but no lie is more grievous than the lies we tell ourselves. There is more danger from the lies we tell ourselves than the lies that other people tell us. This would be discussed extensively in the next chapter, and here is why. In the previous chapter, I talked about the body's biological defense when the brain senses danger or situations that threaten us. These impulses, however irrational they may seem, are meant to protect us. Lying to yourself deadens those instincts and opens us to possible dangers. It is like seeing a speeding car coming down the highway and making up your mind to run across the road anyway. Instinctively, your body knows that this situation is precarious. A slight miscalculation could result in a fatal accident. But instead of waiting for the car to pass, you convince yourself that you are faster than the car, or that the car is farther away than it looks, or it is not speeding as fast as it appears to be. These are the kind of lies we tell ourselves. Self-deception occurs in many forms, but the most popular form of self-deception is denial. We convince ourselves that the threat is not real or imminent, so we make risky choices that we quickly come to regret. Denial is not always a clear-cut case of admitting that something does or does not exist. Sometimes it is masked as optimism in the face of a very dire situation. And in some cases, the very opposite happens. You are in a good situation, but choose to be pessimistic and deny the possibilities. According to a school of thought, humans are more susceptible to self-deception because we choose to hold on to certain beliefs. Say, for instance, you meet this amazing person who seems to match all of your criteria in dealing with such a person. But underneath that layer, you can sense a withholding, or even know outrightly that you are being deceived. But rather than act on that instinct, you choose to act on the hope that people can be what they appear to be. We hear of the expression wolf in sheep clothing all the time. There is no doubt that the wolf may be really good at disguising himself for the sheep, just as there is no doubt that the sheep on some primal level were aware of the wolf in their midst, but chose to deny the existence of the threat because they wanted to believe that the wolf was one of them. We can all imagine how that story played out. This pattern of behavior over time would dim the alarm bells that go off in our senses whenever a crisis arises because of what we Next to denial is rationalization. Denial and rationalization are tools of the same trade. They work handily together in self-deception. Rationalization is essentially how you explain away the situation. I have had female friends, and some of my male friends too, in the same boat, who are in a relationship that isn't really healthy for them. But rather than end things by taking themselves out of the equation, they somehow always seem to come up with more reasons why they should stay put in that relationship. Women in abusive relationships know that a man raising his hand against you is displaying the highest form of disrespect. But I have heard these violent men been described as affectionate, and their occasional violence being just one of their ways of showing the woman that they care. This behavior does not only apply to relationships. People have found themselves working at a place they know exploiting them, but they tell themselves how jobs are difficult to find and how they would not be able to pay the bills if they leave. And so, they continue to work under those terrible conditions refusing to even protest because they have come to accept the situation as normal, thanks to their rationalizations and denials. Whether in our career or in our normal relationships, a lot of us are leading sad and unfulfilled lives because we have convinced ourselves that we cannot do otherwise, and this is our fate. Some people even go a step further and say they deserve what they are getting because of some misdeed in the past. In other words, they have chosen to open the doors to their own prison cells, lock themselves in, and then proceed to act as jailer. Self-deception is a mental prison of some sort, but there are merits to it too. When confronted with challenges that threaten to overwhelm us, a little bit of self-deception can help to bolster your confidence and even the playing field. You may choose a more positive phrase other than self-deception to describe it, but it doesn't change what it is. People like to call it perp talk, getting psyched, or giving yourself a morale boost. Whatever you choose to call it, it still boils down to you convincing yourself about something that you are not. A man wanting to approach a very beautiful woman who he feels is out of his league has to convince himself that he is all that. He acts more confident than he actually feels in order to convince himself that he is indeed confident. So you see, the self-confidence thing can swing both ways. But to avoid falling victim to people who use elements of dark psychology to get their way, you need to recognize the truth for what it is. If your instincts are kicking in, rather than deny it, ask questions. Find out why you feel the way you do about the person, and try to get more answers. When you learn to trust your instincts, you are better able to protect yourself. If a situation is not working out favorably for you, rather than choosing to be powerless about it, because yes, it is choice, you should actively look for a way out of the situation. Don't lie to yourself. The truth may not be what we want it to be, but you should not have to live out a painful lie just to deny it. Recognize the lies you tell yourself for what they really are. Ignore the lies that others tell you as lies and secrets. They are like cancer in the soul. They eat away what is good and leave only destruction behind. Cassandra Clare. We are all victims of lies at some point in our lives. That doesn't mean everyone who came into our circle and lied to us were trying to use us to carry out some evil plan of theirs. In fact, there are truths that when told with malicious intent can have the same effect as a terrible lie, if not worse. Whether the lies are coming from your best friend, a parent, or even someone from work, the effect can be devastating. In some cases, it's not the lie itself that hurts. It is the knowledge that someone you trusted made the deliberate choice to fabricate a story and convince you that it is real. Certain lies are told by simply not saying anything about it. People think, if I didn't say anything, I didn't lie about it. But in reality, that is called a lie by omission. It is almost impossible to start with just one lie and leave it at that. One lie leads to another lie that leads to another lie until both the person telling the lie and the person being lied to are caught in a tangled web of lies. This web can be so tangled that extricating the truth becomes impossible. Lies have a way of changing you, and that change is not always good. This is because you are being fed a fabricated version of reality. Against our better judgment, we buy into these lies, and the anger we feel when the truth is unveiled is not entirely directed at the liar in question. We blame ourselves for believing those lies. When we discover we are being lied to, we react not just to the person and what they represent. Our identity is also being called into question. Your loss of faith is not just in person, but in yourself as well. The loss of faith results in doubts, and doubts lead to distrust. But before we get into the effect of lies, let us go into why we fall for the lies in the first place. I'm going to start off with a general populace and then proceed to bring things closer to home. If you have been active online, you would notice that the most read and followed stories are the sensational pieces. In recent times, there has been an increase in the peddling of stories that have no truth to them. Even the prestigious Rolling magazine, which has always been known for their excellent repertorial skills, had put up a story which they believed to be true that turned out to be false. So you wonder, how come people with years of skills and experience were able to fall for that kind of lie? If you are expecting some kind of grand revelation of truth, I am sorry to disappoint you. The reason is quite simple and naturally a very human response. They wanted to believe it. In the same way, we fall for the lies that people tell us because we want to believe that it is true. This happens on several levels, and it is not always linked to people that are very close to us. For instance, if you share a certain political view or opinion, you are more likely to be following or reading articles or posts that support your belief. If someone tells a lie that supports your belief, you are more inclined to fall for that lie because you want it to confirm your own personal beliefs or theories. This also applies in our relationships as well. You believe that love should be a certain way, and because a person displays patterns that correspond with what your idea of love is meant to be, you choose to ignore the other telltale signs and believe in their lies instead. Another reason we believe a lie is because we have a personal stake in the lie. A manipulator presents you with an alternative reality that you suspect to be false, but because your own personal interest conflicts with the truth, you chose instead to accept the lie. The personal interest may not just be about a personal gain. It could be your special feelings about the person. You like the person, and you have created this halo around the person. So, you would rather stick to your haloed version of events, self-deception at work here, than face the possible reality that this person may be more sinister than he or she looks, and that their ulterior motives may not be for your own best interests at all. Lies that stem from an altered reality of events are not the only type of lies that can be used to manipulate us. When we think of people lying to us, we are more focused on events that were fabricated for the benefit of the liar. But there are other kinds of lies out there that can be as vicious, if not more, than the altered reality. I am referring to lies that are told to change your perception about yourself. Throughout every chapter in this book, I have strongly emphasized that we are most vulnerable when our emotions come to the forefront, especially when those emotions are spiraling out of control. When a manipulator meets a person who appears to be emotionally stable, they know that it would be difficult to work their devious charms on such a person. So, their first line of action is to wear down the emotional foundation of that person. They look for chinks in the person's proverbial armor and begin to exploit it. Let's say you are normally a confident person, but you have some insecurities about your body. A master manipulator would key into that concern and twist it by amplifying your fears. It may not come off as a direct insult, but it would be strategically used to imply that the problem is worse than it actually is. Snide remarks about how big you look today to how you need to cut back on the carbs are subtle but effective hints at the problem they are hoping to amplify. When you start accepting these lies, you would find yourself pondering on problems that really aren't issues in the first place. And gradually, the proverbial mole becomes the mountain, and you are promptly buried under insecurities that have eaten away at your confidence, until you are exactly what the manipulator wants you to be. A person with poor self-esteem and poor confidence that can be easily manipulated. If chirping away at your self-esteem does not get the desired results, they try the negative route, telling you that you cannot do something, and using your past experiences and emotions to support this lie until you believe it. Sometimes, the reverse is the case. You are lulled into a state where you feel secure, even though the reality is different. This tactic is often used when the perpetrator wants to extract something like money or a favor from you. They used positive reinforcements rooted in lies to give you a false sense of security, and then they strike. It takes mental clarity and effort to see through the lies that people tell in whatever form they appear. Dwelling on the past. I have learned that if you must leave a place that you have lived in and loved, and where all your yesteryears were buried deep, leave it any way except a slow way. Leave it the fastest way you can. Never turn back, and never believe that an hour you remember is a better hour, because it is dead. Past years seem safe ones, vanquished ones, while the future lives in a cloud, formidable from a distance. Beryl Markham. In a track race, athletes are trained to stay focused and ground themselves in the present. There is no looking back figuratively and literally. Their senses are attuned to the moment. When the race begins, it is all about them, the track and the finish line. This is because the second they start paying attention to anything else but the race, they start losing the race. Even in a relay race where the athlete has to look back and take the baton from their running mates, their gaze promptly returns to the track in front of them as soon as the baton exchanges hands. Life is like a race, and looking back on the past can distract and hold you back from being the best you can be. And most importantly, this kind of distraction is the kind of thing a manipulator would love to use against you. When the brain is not actively triggering emotions that stems from memories, our mind does a bang-up job of bringing all those emotions to the forefront. I tried to think of how to best explain the firm grip our past can have over us, and a scene from one of my favorite movies illustrates this. Without going into the plot of the movie Pacific Rim, let me set the scene for you. Mako and Raleigh are paired up to try out the Jaeger, a machine designed to destroy the aliens for the first time and to manipulate the machine. There has to be a mental connection through what they called the mental link. The connection process takes you through a series of memories, your past, before you're rooted in the present. Mako's recollection of her past is so vivid that she becomes trapped in it. This results in her detachment from the present reality. This detachment almost results in her activating a nuclear weapon that could have destroyed the present. Bringing it back to us, our reconnection with our past may not be as vivid, but the psychological threat that dwelling on the past poses is just as potent. When we talked about emotional scars earlier, we explored the pains emotions triggered by events, and the focus was on our biological defense mechanisms. We know that the brain interprets certain signs from our environment as threats, and in so doing, it activates reactions that we are not always able to control. This is somewhat similar to that, except this time, we are actively engaging a negative experience by thinking consistently on it. And in that process, we unleash an avalanche of emotions that could put us under. Psychologists refer to this as ruminating. Just like a goat or cow regurgitates the food it ate hours prior and chews on it, we have a tendency to regurgitate our experiences and dwell on them. But it is not just the negative past that we cling to. Sometimes, the past has a lot of positive memories that provide us with comfort. This makes it difficult to let go of it. Unfortunately, it is just as easy to become disillusioned with the positive past as it is with a negative past. We all know someone in our life who is fond of using the phrase, "the good old days." And we know how heartbreaking it can be to watch them cling to the remnants of the so-called glory days. You may not use that phrase, but your fondness of the past can get you quickly stuck in that memory and set you on a path that destroys your chances in the present. Of course, you may want to argue that if bad memories dredge up bad emotions, then good memories bring up good emotions, and that cannot be bad. The truth is, as long as it is disconnecting you from the present reality, it is bad. And this is what dark psychology exploits. When you live your life in the past, you get yourself rooted in a situation that either slows you down or stops you from moving forward. Fear is one of the most powerful emotions that our memories can activate. And it is not just the famous fear of the boogeyman or whatever inspires serious fear in you that keeps you down. The fear of uncertainty can also hold you back. You might be holding on to a certain relationship, job or lifestyle, simply because you are afraid of what would happen if that thing or person is no longer in your life. And that fear keeps you there, even when the situation is not ideal for you. This is not denial, because you are aware of the wrongness of the situation. You have just decided to put your focus on what was, and distance yourself, or worse, accepted what is, because you are afraid of what will might be. And you had best believe that manipulators and saboteurs in your life would capitalize on this fear and work their deviousness to exploit this knowledge until they can get what they want. Their modus operandi would be to somehow strengthen the grip that this past has on you and convince you that the present reality is a necessity. They use your insistence on focusing on the past to discredit your present and rob you of a future. The irony here is that you are at least partially aware of what is happening, but you have made a conscious or subconscious decision. Remove yourself from the equation, and you justify your decision with an event that has already happened. In essence, you yourself have created this illusion of the absence of choice and given the reins of your presence to others. This is not to say that looking back is completely wrong. Rear view mirrors were created specifically for this purpose. The point here is, if you really want to separate the truth from the lies, staying rooted in the present is one way to go about it. Psychologists say that people who dwell on the past are more likely to be depressed than others. Depression is one of those dark emotions that leaves you vulnerable. And if you do get into treatment for the depression, one of the steps to overcoming it is to retrace your steps in the past, coming to terms with the reality of the situation, and then applying the lessons learned from the revisited past before letting go. If you have a problem letting go, you only need to remind yourself that you have absolutely no control over what has happened. No matter how much you revisit it and dwell on it, you cannot change what has happened. The same can be said of the future. There are many possibilities. Sure, the steps you take now could to an extent determine what happens tomorrow, but there are too many variables to accurately predict the future. What you own and have total control over is what you do right now. Detach yourself from the past and from the fears of the future and put your focus on the right now. Blind optimism. I am not interested in blind optimism, but I am very interested in optimism that is hard-won. That takes on darkness and then says, that is not enough. Colum McCann. When we take on responsibilities in life, we do so with gusto and enthusiasm. And as with everything in life, we encounter challenges which could range anywhere from mild obstacles to raging storms that seem to be bent on destruction. Our destruction. In those times, your zeal and enthusiasm might wane. What keeps you from giving up and gets you through that rough patch is optimism. But there are different levels to this thing called optimism, and not all of them have the same positive impact in our lives. There is a kind of optimism that appears to disconnect you from the reality, and that type of optimism is known blind optimism. But before we get into that, let us look at that aspect of human nature that makes us want to believe in an alternate outcome even when we are facing a very dire situation. Just like the author of the quote above, we are interested in what makes us unflinching in the face of darkness. Like all facets of human emotional behavior, it appears that we are simply hardwired to be optimistic. And it is not just in the face of danger. This behavior is present in our simple everyday activities. You have a product that is maybe a few days past its expiry date, but you go ahead to eat it anyway in the hope that it would not cause any harm to you. Or you are approaching the traffic lights just as it changes colors, and rather than slow to a stop, you speed up in the hope that you would make it past the lights without getting caught. Or even taking the chance to ask a person out in the hopes that they would feel the same way about you, as opposed to throttling over your exposed feelings on the floor with a sledgehammer. It is part of your emotional reflex. Despite Murphy's Law, you are optimistic because you are human. However, some people take this optimistic approach in their dealings a tad too far. Instead of just pushing the boundaries, as I illustrated with the examples above, they put absolute faith in the possibility that the good outcome they are hoping for would outweigh the likelihood of things going wrong. This kind of thinking inspires a reckless behavior that could have a painful ending if the emotion is not checkmated. Being optimistic has a lot of health and mental benefits. If you have ever read the book, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent, you are no doubt furnished with information on just how well positive thinking can serve you. Medical studies show that people who are optimistic are more than likely to recover from life-threatening sicknesses than people who are the opposite. Overall, optimism can blind you. Blind optimism is a form of self-deception. In this case, you are not just thinking that you have a good chance of getting the desired positive outcome. You have deluded yourself into thinking that things would play out the way you hoped they would. And because they are banking on the positives of the situation, they do not take any steps to protect themselves in the event that things go awry because they are not even entertaining any negative notion. When you are blinded by optimism, you have a higher tendency to rationalize and explain away the reality of the situation. Even when you are presented with the gravity of the situation, your blind optimism keeps you from taking any action that would mitigate negative outcomes. As I said earlier, we fall for a lie because we want to. Blind optimism is a kind of lie that also works in distancing us from the reality of things. You find yourself confronting a lie directly in the face, but perhaps because accepting the reality that this person or situation is not what they seem or appear to be might be too hurtful, we turn on the optimism switch a notch higher. Our need to want to believe that people are not as terrible as they may be makes us give in to demands that have a negative impact on us. So, we replace that negative gut instinct with a bright reaction straight out of the pages of the book of blind optimism. And oftentimes, we do this because we want to feel good about the situation or about the person. Blind optimism affects your ability to accurately assess the pitfalls and problem areas in any given situation. It puts you in a mental state where you are almost walking on clouds and gives you a false sense of security. You feel invincible to the risks and fail to take precautions. The plus side of blind optimism is that you are more likely to take on risks than most. In business, people who are blindly optimistic are usually in the early adopters category. When a new product hits the market, while others are busy calculating the risks and trying to assess their odds, these guys dive in feet first. A lot of new business count on people like this. In day-to-day living, blind optimism creates a dangerous detachment from reality. It is like a person who wakes up in the morning and decides that he wants to skydive. Giving no thought to altitudes, weather conditions, or landscape, he just buckles on his parachute and dives. The chances of them hitting a rock before they are able to deploy their parachute is just as high as making it to the ground in one piece. But they chose to prepare for only the reality that they are willing to accept. You cannot deal with people in the same manner and not expect some sort of negative backlash. There is ignorance, and then there is the willingness to see the danger ahead and chose to do nothing about it. It doesn't matter if this person is your best friend, your mother, or your partner. If you spot the signs that could imply something else is at work, wishing and hoping that you are wrong is not going to protect you if you are right. Sure, it might temporarily keep that relationship in a good place, but in the long run, even that too would disintegrate. Taking off the blindfold would require you being truthful with yourself. There is a common saying that the truth is bitter. I wish I could say that this wasn't the case. When it comes to your relationships with people, bitter is an understatement in the description of the truth. Confronting the reality of the situation can birth a pain that you never imagined, and for a while, it is going to hurt. In a situation where your emotions are being taken advantage of, you cannot afford to bury your head in the sand because you don't want to face the reality of your experience. Even a gradual revelation is not helpful. What you need to do is rip off the Band-Aid and face the emotion squarely. The truth hurts, but it would also set you free. You just need to remind yourself that it is all that this pain is all part of the process, and the hurting brings you one step closer to healing.